When my son told me, "You should be grateful she even talks to you," I realized I had lost him long before that day. His voice didn't sound angry. It sounded tired, distant. Asif, the words had been rehearsed in his head before they left his mouth. I remember staring at the floor, afraid that if I looked at him, I would break completely. I wanted to say so many things in that moment. I wanted to tell him that I carried him in my arms when he couldn't walk, that I stayed awake all those nights when he had a fever, that every breath I took was once tied to his laughter. But all I said was, "I understand, honey." I really do. And that was the truth. I did understand. Sometimes love fades quietly. Not because of anger, but because of walls built slowly, brick by brick, out of pride, misunderstanding, and unspoken words. That night, I went home to my small apartment, the one I rent, here in this foreign country, and sat by the window. The city lights outside looked blurred through my tears. It had been years since I left my home country to live near my son. I thought I was doing the right thing, a mother wanting to be close to her only child. I never imagined that closeness could turn into distance even while living just a few miles apart. I came here 8 years ago. My husband had passed away 2 winters before that. The house back home felt empty. Too quiet for someone who had spent decades cooking for a family, waiting at the gate for a child to return from school, listening to footsteps in the hallway. When my son got married and settled abroad, he insisted I join him. "Mom, it's lonely there without family," he said over the phone. "You'll love it here. Clean streets, safe neighborhoods, nice people." His voice was full of excitement then. I could feel the pride in it. He had worked hard, built a life, and wanted me to share it. I sold the old house, packed my memories into 3 suitcases, and boarded a plane. I still remember that first morning here. The air smelled different, colder, sharper. The houses stood in neat rows, each one silent, like people who preferred not to talk. My son met me at the airport with flowers. His new wife stood beside him, polite but quiet. She smiled when our eyes met, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the heart. Still, I told myself, she's nervous, that's all. I wanted to love her as my own. I truly did. Their home was beautiful. Glass windows, soft carpets, walls painted in calm beige. I remember touching the curtains and saying, "You've done well, son." "Your father would have been proud," he smiled. That smile was my comfort. But even then, I noticed how his wife looked slightly away, as if my presence had shifted something in her world. At first, things were fine. We shared dinners together, talked about his work, watched shows on the couch. She would sometimes bring tea and sit quietly while we spoke. I tried to include her, asked about her family, her job, her dreams. She always answered kindly, but shortly, as if every question took effort. It's strange how small silences can become heavy. In those early days, I told myself everything would settle, but deep inside, I felt a distance, a thin wall between us that kept growing, even though no one mentioned it. One day, I was in the kitchen early, making tea the way Myson liked, with cardamom and a little extra milk. His wife walked in and froze. "Oh, I was going to make breakfast," she said. I smiled. "No problem, honey. I just thought I'd help." her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's fine. I have my routine. You can rest." Something in her tone stung me, not because it was harsh, but because it made me feel like I didn't belong. I quietly put the cup down and walked out. Later, my son noticed the untouched tea and asked, "You didn't make any today." I just said, "I wasn't sure if you wanted it." He didn't ask why. The weeks turned into months. My son grew busier with work. Evenings became quieter. Sometimes I would hear them laugh softly behind their closed bedroom door. That sound should have made me happy, but instead, it made me realize how alone I felt. I started going for walks in the park nearby. There were other older people there, some feeding birds, some talking to trees as if they understood. I used to watch a little boy ride his bike in circles while his mother cheered from the bench. Every time she clapped, I remembered clapping for my son when he learned to ride. He had fallen so many times, but he always got up again. That memory, that tiny scene of scraped knees and laughter, used to fill me with warmth. Now it only reminded me how far away that little boy was from the man who now barely looked me in the eye. Sometimes, my son would call me on his way home from work. Those calls were short, mostly updates, quick check-ins, but one evening he sounded tense. "Mom, please don't move things around in the kitchen," he said. "She likes things a certain way." I froze. "Oh, I just cleaned the counter." "I know, but she feels uncomfortable." "Just let her handle it. He didn't mean to hurt me." I could hear that, but the message was clear. The house was hers now, not mine, and so I stopped touching things. Nights became my hardest time. I would sit in my room, look at the photo of us. Him as a little boy with missing teeth. His arm around my neck. I used to whisper, "Where did you go, my boy?" even though Ik knew he was just a few miles away. Then came the day of my birthday. I had baked a small cake, not fancy, just the way he liked when he was young, with vanilla frosting and colored sprinkles. I waited all day. By evening, no one came. At 9 p.m., my phone rang. "Sorry, we got caught up," he said. "Maybe tomorrow, okay?" "Of course," I said, forcing a smile he couldn't see. "Tomorrow is fine." I looked at the cake for a long time after the call ended. Then I cut one slice, placed it on a plate, and said softly, "Happy birthday to me." That night I didn't cry. I just felt empty. Months passed. I began to feel like a guest who had stayed too long. She started keeping to herself. And he, torn between us, spoke less. One evening, I overheard them talking in the living room. Her voice was low but sharp. "She doesn't respect boundaries." "I can't live like this," he sighed. "She's my mother. Then make her understand." I stepped back quietly, pretending I hadn't heard. But the next morning, I packed my bag and said I wanted to find a small place of my own. He tried to protest at first, but his relief was visible, subtle, but there. "You don't have to." "Mom," he said. "I'll be fine," I replied. "I'll still be close." He didn't insist again. I moved into a tiny apartment nearby, just 2 rooms, but with a window that caught the morning sun. For a while, he visited every weekend. We would drink tea, talk about his work, laugh a little. But slowly, the visits stopped. He said work was busy. Then came silence, a silence that stretched into weeks, then months. And then, that day came. The day he said those words. You should be grateful she even talks to you. He wasn't cruel. He was tired, torn, but in that moment, I saw the distance between us clearly. It was no longer measured in miles. It was measured in love lost, in things unsaid, in pride and hurt, and all the moments we didn't hold onto when we could have. That's when I realized I hadn't just lost my son that day. I had been losing him. Piece by piece, long before that moment ever arrived. After that day, something inside me changed. I stopped expecting phone calls. I stopped checking my messages every night. The part of me that once waited by the phone quietly learned how not to wait. It wasn't anger. It was something softer, sadder, like a light that had gone out, not with a storm. But because no one remembered to keep it burning, I told myself that children grow up. They build lives, and mothers are supposed to let them go. But deep down, I also knew that letting go doesn't mean disappearing. The days began to blend together. Morning tea, the same view from the window, the same birds landing on the power lines. Sometimes I would cook too much, a habit that refused Tootie, and then pack the leftovers neatly in containers. I used to think, maybe he'll drop by. He didn't. I tried to fill my days. There was a small community center nearby that held gatherings for older women, most of them immigrants like me. We shared stories over tea, stories of sons and daughters we raised, stories of phone calls that came less and less, of birthdays that were forgotten but really just avoided. One woman said something that stayed with me. She said, "We crossed oceans for our children, but they built their homes on islands we can't reach." I smiled politely then. But later that night I cried, because I knew exactly what she meant. Once, I tried to call him again. It had been nearly 2 months since we'd last spoken. When he answered, his tone was polite, distant, formal. "Hello, Mom, everything okay?" "Yes, honey," I said softly. "Just wanted to hear your voice." There was silence, then a sigh. "I'm at work." "Mom, can I call you later?" He didn't, and I didn't remind him. One Sunday morning, I decided to visit him. I baked his favorite kebabs, the ones with a cilantro and green chili. I wrapped them carefully, took the bus, and stood outside his gate. When I rang the bell, his wife opened the door. Her expression froze for a second, then softened, but only slightly. "Oh, you're here," she said. "Yes, I brought some food for you both." "That's thoughtful," she said, glancing behind her. "But we're heading out." Her words were polite, but her body blocked the doorway. I could smell the perfume of a new dress. It was clear they had plans. "Of course," I said quickly. "I won't take your time, just give these to him." She took the bag, nodding. "I will." But as I walked away, I heard the door close before she could even finish her promise. I never knew if he ate those kebabs. After that visit, I stopped going, not out of pride, but because rejection, even when gentle, feels like cold rain seeping through your bones. Instead, I started writing letters, not emails, not messages, real letters, with pen and paper. I never mailed them. I kept them in a small wooden box under my bed. Each letter began with, "My dear son," and ended with, "I hope you are eating well." Some letters were long, filled with stories from my day. Others were short, just a few sentences about how the morning light reminded me of his smile. It was my way of speaking to him when his silence grew too loud. One evening, while sorting through old photos, I found a picture of him as a teenager, sitting beside me, laughing with his head tilted back. I touched the picture and whispered, "Where did you go, my boy?" But I already knew he hadn't gone anywhere. He was still here, in the same city, maybe even driving past the same streets I walked every day. Yet somehow, he had drifted far beyond my reach. Time moved forward, as it always does. Seasons changed. The trees outside my window turned golden, then bare, then green again. But inside my heart, it always felt like winter. I saw him once by accident. At the grocery store. He was in a rush, pushing a cart, his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't see me, or maybe he did, but pretended not to. I stood still, watching him walk past, a stranger in his own mother's story. I could have called out. I could have said his name. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe pain, maybe I just didn't want to hear that same polite tone again. That night, I wrote another letter. In it, I said, "I don't blame you, my son. Life is loud, and love becomes quiet. Maybe it's my fault, too. I tried too hard to hold on when I should have let you breathe. If I ever made your home feel smaller, I am sorry. I only wanted to be part of your happiness, not a shadow over it." I folded that letter and placed it with the others. It felt like closing a door I had been standing in too long. Then one winter morning, a neighbor knocked on my door. She said she had seen my son at the hospital. He and his wife had welcomed a baby boy, my first grandchild. No one had told me. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. It was as if my heart had stopped between one beat and the next. I smiled and thanked her for the news, pretending to be fine. But as soon as she left, I sat down on the floor and wept, quietly, like someone mourning something that had died years ago. Not a person this time, but a relationship. Days later, I received a message from him. Just one line. "Mom, we had a baby boy. Everyone's fine. No name, no photo, just a few words that should have meant joy, but instead felt like a reminder of how far apart we were." I typed a reply. "May God bless him with health and happiness," then deleted it before sending. I didn't want to interrupt their joy with my presence. The months after that were the quietest of my life. No calls, no visits. I saw pictures of the baby on social media once. Someone had tagged him. My son was smiling proudly, holding the little one in his arms. I wanted to reach through the screen and touch that tiny face, but I didn't, because I was no longer part of their story. At the community center, people started noticing my silence. One woman said, "You should talk to him. Don't wait until it's too late." Her words pierced something deep inside me, because I knew too late can arrive quietly, not with death, but with years that can never be taken back. "Still," I said, "he'll come when he's ready." But in my heart, I wasn't sure he ever would. One evening, as I sat watching the sunset, my phone buzzed. It was a video call from him. For a moment, I froze. My hands trembled as I accepted. His face appeared on the screen, tired but smiling faintly. "Mom," he said softly, "this is your grandson." He turned the camera, and there he was, a small baby, wrapped in a blue blanket. My heart melted instantly. "He's beautiful," I whispered. His wife's voice came faintly from the background. "Say bye-bye, baby." Then the screen went dark. The call lasted less than a minute, but for me, it was enough to last a lifetime. After the call ended, I sat for a long time, staring at my reflection in the black screen. My eyes were swollen, my lips trembling, yet I was smiling, because even in that brief moment, I had seen the continuation of my love. It didn't matter if he never called again. That 1 minute reminded me that part of me still lived. In that child, in his laughter, in his small, peaceful face, I whispered to myself, "It's enough. Maybe this is what love looks like now. Quiet, distant, but still alive." It was early spring when I finally decided to stop waiting. The morning light felt softer than usual, filtering through my thin curtains. I sat at the table, sipping tea that had already turned cold, and stared at the empty chair across from me. That chair had a story of its own. It was where my son used to sit when he visited me. The first few months after I moved out, he would eat the flatbreads I made, teasing me for using too much butter. Now, it stood there silently, gathering dust. It's strange how silence can become a companion. It stops hurting after a while. It just sits beside you, like an old friend who doesn't talk much anymore. That morning, I felt something shift inside me, not an explosion. Not even pain, just a quiet understanding that I could not keep holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. I loved him still. Oh, I loved him with every breath. But love, I realized, cannot survive when it has no place to land. So I did what I had been afraid to do for years. I opened the wooden box under my bed, the one that held all me unsent letters, and began to read them one by one. There were so many, some written in shaky handwriting, some in ink that had smudged with tears. Each one was a chapter of a story that no one else would ever read. The first letter was from the year I moved into this apartment. It said, "My dear son, I know your new life is busy. Don't worry about me. I just want you to know that the tea still tastes the same, sweet, with a bit too much milk. I made your favorite casseroles today, and even though it's just me eating it, I kept your portion aside. Old habits. I hope your wife is doing well. Tell her I pray for her every night." I smiled as I read it. The woman who wrote those words was still hopeful, still waiting at the door, still believing her son would come. Then I opened another, written 2 years later. "My dear son, sometimes I dream of you as a little boy, running down the lane with your school bag swinging. In my dream, you turn around and wave, but when I try to run after you, my feet don't move. I wake up breathless, clutching my chest. Maybe that's what love becomes when it has nowhere to go. A dream that keeps repeating itself." My eyes blurred as I read that one. I didn't cry. I had no tears left to give. I kept reading until the stack of letters beside me grew taller. Each one carried pieces of my heart, folded neatly, hidden quietly. I realized that my life had been waiting, not living. I waited for his calls. I waited for visits. I waited for forgiveness. For something I didn't even understand I had done wrong, and as I sat there, surrounded by years of words unsent, he finally whispered, "It's time." That evening, I took out an envelope and began to write my final letter, not because I wanted him to read it, but because I needed to free myself from the weight of what I'd never said. The letter began the same way as always. "My dear son," but the rest was different. "This might be the last letter I ever write to you. Don't worry, I am not unwell. I just realized something. All these years, I've been waiting for you to come back, not just to visit me, but to be the boy I once knew. But people change. And love changes too. Maybe you didn't mean to hurt me. Maybe I didn't know how to let you grow. Somewhere between my love and your life, we both lost something precious. I am not angry anymore. I just miss you. Not as a son, but as a person I once knew so well." I paused, letting the pen rest between my fingers. Then I continued, "If you ever think of me, don't feel guilty. I have lived my life loving you, and that's enough. You were my purpose, my reason, my story. And though our chapters ended differently than I hoped, I am grateful they existed at all. When I finished, I signed it simply, 'With love, Mom.'" I folded the letter, placed it inside the box, and then did something I'd never done before. I took the box outside, into the small courtyard behind my building. It was quiet, the kind of silence that feels sacred. The air smelled faintly of rain. I opened the box, looked at the letters one last time, and whispered, "Thank you for keeping me company." Then I set them alight. The flames flickered softly, golden and gentle, curling the edges of the paper like old memories fading away. I watched them until the last ember disappeared. There was no pain, only peace. It felt as though I had been holding my breath for years, and finally I could exhale. That night, I slept better than I had in a long time. No dreams, no ache, just quiet. In the morning, the sun felt warmer. The birds outside were louder. Even the tea tasted sweeter. I smiled, really smiled. For the first time in years, it wasn't because everything was fixed. It was because I had finally accepted that not everything can be fixed, and that's okay. A few weeks later, I received a call. It was an unfamiliar number. When I answered, I heard his voice, hesitant, softer than I remembered. "Mom?" My heart stopped. For a second I thought I was dreaming. "Yes." "Son?" There was a long pause. I just wanted to check if you're okay." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm okay," I said gently. "I'm always okay." Another pause. "I've been meaning to visit," he said. "It's just been busy." "I understand," I said, and this time I meant it. Because I did understand. He wasn't cruel. He was just living his life, the way I once lived mine when my parents waited for me to call. Maybe this was the circle of love. Imperfect, unbalanced, but still love all the same. That evening, I sat by my window, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, soft, forgiving colors, and for the first time, I didn't wish for anything more. I whispered into the fading light, Be happy, my son. That's all a mother ever wants. The next morning, I began writing again. Not letters this time, but stories. Stories about mothers, about loss, about love that stays even when people don't. It was my way of keeping him alive in words, not the man he'd become, but the boy who once held my hand and promised, "I'll never leave you." Mom. Months passed. He called sometimes, short conversations, polite but kind. He never mentioned the past, and neither did I. We had both learned to live with the distance, and somehow that was enough. Because sometimes love doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it just needs to exist, quietly, steadily, like the rhythm of a heart that refuses to stop beating. It had been almost 7 years since I last saw my son. 7 years of birthdays I didn't attend. 7 years of messages I never received. 7 years of learning to live without waiting for the phone to ring. I had grown older in that time, not just in years, but in quietness. There's a kind of silence that becomes part of you when you stop explaining yourself to people who no longer listen. I had moved to a smaller apartment closer to the park. It was easier to manage, and the rent was lower. Sometimes I would see other families there, young parents pushing strollers, older ones feeding pigeons. I never felt jealous. I just watched. Watching was enough for me. One afternoon, while watering the little plant by my window, I heard a knock on the door. It was soft, hesitant, like someone who wasn't sure they should be there. For a moment, I thought it might be the landlord. Or perhaps the neighbor's child, selling cookies again. But when I opened the door, I froze. It was him. My son. He looked older, not in a bad way, just grown. His hair had a few gray strands near the temples. His eyes, once sharp with pride, were tired now. Behind him stood a woman I barely recognized. His wife. She was holding a small bag of groceries, her eyes lowered, like she didn't know whether to smile or apologize. I didn't move. Neither did he. For a few seconds, it felt like the world had stopped. Then, he said quietly, "Hi, Mom." 2 words, that was all, but it was enough to make my hands tremble. I stepped aside. "Come in," I whispered. My voice cracked on the second word. He looked around the apartment as if searching for something familiar. There wasn't much. A small sofa, an old calendar, the same TC had gifted me years ago. He sat down slowly, his wife beside him. For a while, none of us spoke. I poured tea, though my hands shook slightly. The cups clinked softly on the table. The sound felt too loud in that small space. Finally, I said, "You look tired." He smiled weakly. "Work's been a lot." He hesitated, then added, "We moved to a new place, closer to the city." I nodded. "That's good." There was silence again, not the painful silence of years ago. This one felt unsure, fragile, like a thin thread that could break or hold, depending on how gently we handled it. Then his wife spoke softly. "I found your number in his old phone. I thought we should visit." I looked at her, surprised. Her eyes were kind, even nervous. She wasn't the same woman who once refused to open the door for me. Time had softened her too. "Thank you," I said simply. My son looked down. He didn't speak, but I could see something in his expression, regret, maybe, or shame. It's strange how a mother can still read her child's face, no matter how many years pass. He took a slow breath. "Mom," he said, "I should have called. I should have." His voice faltered. He looked at his hands, then at me. I thought I was doing the right thing, balancing everything, keeping peace at home. But I see now I was just avoiding the truth. I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to make it harder for him. Instead, I said softly, "You were young. You did what you thought was right. We all do." He shook his head. "No, I wasn't right. I hurt you. And you still kept sending cards on my birthday." I never replied, but I read every one of them. That made me smile. A small, quiet smile. "I know," I said. "A mother always knows." His wife's eyes welled up. She whispered, "I'm sorry too. I didn't understand back then. I thought you were trying to control things. I didn't realize you were just trying to belong." Her words reached a part of me I didn't know still needed healing. I reached across the table and touched her hand gently. "It's all right," I said. "We all misunderstand love sometimes." The room stayed silent, but it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was full of forgiveness, of things that didn't need to be spoken anymore. We sat there for hours, drinking tea, talking about small things, the weather, my neighbors, their new home. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy. Just the kind of ordinary conversation that feels sacred after years of distance. When they finally stood to leave, my son hugged me. Really hugged me, not the quick, polite kind, but the deep, quiet kind that says I'm sorry without words. I rested my hand on his back, and for the first time in years, I felt his heartbeat against mine. Before he left, he said, "Can we visit again soon?" I nodded. "You don't need to ask." He smiled faintly, the same way he did as a boy when he promised to behave after being scolded. And just like then, I didn't fully believe he'd keep the promise, but I hoped he would. When the door closed, I stood still for a long time. The air felt lighter, warmer. I looked at the teacups on the table. The half-empty one was his. I didn't wash it that night. I left it there, just to feel like he was still around. Later, as I sat by the window again, I watched the evening lights flicker outside. The city had changed, but so had I. I no longer carried the same ache. It was still there, yes, but softer, like a scar that doesn't hurt anymore. In that quiet moment, I whispered to myself, maybe love never really leaves. It just changes its shape. And for the first time in many years, I felt at peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally stopped waiting for what was already in my heart all along. It's been almost a year since that visit. He calls now, sometimes, not often, but enough. Once every few weeks, maybe. We talk about simple things, the weather, his work, his daughter learning to ride a bicycle. His voice always sounds a little tired, but softer now, like he carries less anger. Sometimes he tells me, "Mom, I'll come by next weekend," and sometimes he forgets. But I don't wait by the door anymore. I've learned to let love come quietly when it wants to. I still cook his favorite curry once in a while. Not because I expect him to eat it, but because cooking it reminds me that love can survive even in small rituals. I share it with my neighbors, or the little boy upstairs who reminds me of him when he was young. Every time I stir the pot, I remember his laughter echoing through our old kitchen back home. A sound so clear that for a moment, I forget all the years that passed between then and now. I used to think forgiveness meant saying, "It's okay," but now I understand. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about remembering without pain. It's about looking at the wound and realizing it no longer bleeds. Sometimes late at night, I sit by the window and watch Thessaly lights. I imagine him somewhere out there, coming home from work, kissing his daughter goodnight. That thought is enough. I don't need more. There's peace in acceptance, a peace I never knew before. If someone were to ask me what I've learned, I'd say this: love is not measured by how close we stay, but by how deeply we care, even from far away. Sometimes we lose people not because love disappears, but because life teaches us through distance. I wish I had understood that sooner. Maybe I wouldn't have spent so many nights blaming myself, wondering what I could have done differently. But then again, maybe that's what motherhood is. Learning to hold on and let go over and over until it feels natural. The last card I sent him on his birthday said only one sentence: "No matter where life takes you, my love will always know the way back." He texted me that night, just one word: "Thank you." And that was enough. Now, when I look back, I don't see a story of pain. I see a journey, one that began with love, stumbled through silence, and ended with peace. I still keep his teacup by the window, not as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder that love once filled it, and still does, in its own quiet way. When mine cease, I close my eyes. I can still hear his little voice from years ago. "Mama, don't go to sleep yet. Tell me a story." And I smile, because I finally know this whole time I was living one.